Picture this. It is the middle of a heat wave. The sun is relentless. The ground is cracked and dry. There is a hosepipe ban or you are barely watering, and every lawn on the street has gone brown and crisp. Your neighbor's lettuce has bolted, their beds are fried, and everybody says the same thing: nothing grows in this, wait for it to break. And in that exact heat, I am going to show you 7 vegetables you can grow so well you would stop buying them, counted down to the one that turns the whole thing on its head, because here is what almost nobody believes. There is a whole side of the vegetable shop that does not just survive a heat wave, it actually grows better in it, sweeter and heavier in the blazing sun, while a mild weather garden would give you far less. There are crops the heat makes tastier, hotter and more aromatic, not worse. And a baked, sun-hammered garden quietly loses most of the pests and diseases that torment everybody else. Let me show you the fast one first, because it is the moment it flips in your head. On the very day the whole street's salad has bolted to bitter seed, you walk out to your baking hot corner and you cut a full bowl of fresh, tender leaves, about a minute from the heat to your plate, from crops that were thriving while everything cool season around them cooked. Salad you cut in the middle of a heat wave, that is not a fantasy, and it is not a trick. A scorched garden looks finished, but it is quietly sitting on 3 gifts a cool, wet garden fights all year to get. And I will be honest with you in one sentence up front: this is not a cool season salad garden. The lettuce and the peas really do bolt and fry in this, and a genuine long drought still means you water deep pots and mulch now and then, not never. But the heat-built side of the shopping, the peppers, the tomatoes, the beans, the roots, the tough greens, and the herbs you overpay for the worst, does not just cope with a heat wave, it runs on it, because the heat already beats a mild, wet garden at the 3 things that quietly matter most for these crops. It kills off the slugs, snails, mildew, and blight that shred a cool, damp plot. So this is one of the cleanest gardens you will ever grow. It concentrates the sugars and oils, so the fruit and the herbs come out sweeter, hotter, and more aromatic than they ever would in mild weather. And it drives a long, fast, generous season, because the blazing sun that scorches a lettuce is the exact engine these crops were built to run on. Give the heat the crops that were made for it instead of fighting it with the ones that were not, and it grows. So here is the countdown: 7 vegetables you can grow in a heat wave and stop buying, starting at number 7 with the fastest win of the lot. Number 7 is the fastest proof the heat works, and it is the crop that quietly wins while everyone else's salad dies: heat-proof leaves. I am starting here because most people quit the second a hot spell bolts their lettuce, and they never learn there is a whole family of leaves that laughs at the heat. Forget the lettuce and the ordinary spinach in a heat wave, they are cool season crops and they will bolt and burn every time. Instead, you grow the heat lovers, the leaves built for exactly this: Malabar spinach that climbs a string and thrives in the blaze, New Zealand spinach that sprawls happily across a baking bed, amaranth and callaloo, and purslane, a fat, juicy, lemony leaf that actually grows as a weed in the hottest, driest ground there is. Stand a wide trough or a couple of pots in the full sun, scatter or plant the heat-proof leaves, mulch the top well, and that is the whole job. Here is why the heat wins for these, and it is the surprise that sets up the whole video. These leaves evolved in hot climates, so the very heat that shoots a lettuce to bitter seed is the weather they crop hardest in, staying tender and mild for weeks while everything cool season around them has cooked. And the trick most people miss: harvest them, cut and come again, taking only the outer leaves and leaving the growing point, so one planting hands you leaves for weeks, not one bowl. A heat wave tray of heat-proof greens hands you your first homegrown crop, fresh leaves on the exact day the whole street salad has bolted, about a minute from the heat to your plate. But if leaves are the fastest thing you can grow out there, the next number is the crop that grows straight up in the heat and feeds the soil while it does it. Number 6 is the bean built for a drought. Number 6 is the crop that shrugs off the heat and the dry ground that would flatten an ordinary bean, cowpeas and yardlong beans. Your everyday runner and French beans are thirsty and they sulk and drop their flowers the second it gets truly hot, which is why most people give up on beans in a heat wave, so you grow the beans that were built for it instead. Cowpeas, also called black-eyed peas, and their tall cousin, the yardlong bean, are heat and drought legends. They crop happily in blazing sun and dry soil where a normal bean would collapse, and they grow straight up a string or a light frame, so they turn the one thing a small hot yard has going spare, the air above it, into a wall of food. Here is why the heat wins, and it is the clever part down in the pot. These are legumes, so they quietly pull nitrogen out of the air and feed it back into the soil, giving something back instead of only taking, which leaves that pot richer for whatever you grow next, even in the middle of a dry spell. And they do the generous trick. The more young pods you pick, the more the plant sets, so a single row up a string can hand you tender pods and beans for weeks in the exact weather that stops everyone else growing beans at all. Lean a slim trellis against a hot wall, stand one pot at the bottom, mulch it, and send them up. You have turned the baking yard's spare air into a living wall of drought-proof beans. But the next number is the flavor you overpay for, the very worst of all, and half of it grows better in a heat wave than it ever could in a cool, damp garden. Number 5 is the taste the heat makes better. Number 5 is the corner of the produce aisle you overpay for the worst. The fresh herbs, and the best of them, were born for a heat wave. Think about how they sell them. A few cut sprigs sealed in a stiff plastic clamshell, one of the highest prices by weight in the whole store, and they turn to slime in the fridge in days, so half of every pack goes in the bin. It is the worst value on the shelf and one of the easiest things of all to replace. And here is the surprise that makes this number perfect for the heat. The Mediterranean herbs, rosemary, thyme, oregano, sage, and basil, come from hot, dry, sun-baked hillsides, so a heat wave is not a threat to them, it is home. This is the whole point of this number. Heat and drought stress actually concentrate the oils in these herbs, so the very weather that is frying everything else is making your rosemary and thyme and basil more aromatic and more flavorful than a pampered, well-watered plant would ever be. They genuinely thrive on the neglect. Stand pots of the ones you cook with most in the full sun, water them sparingly because they hate wet feet far more than they hate drought, and let the heat do the rest. Here is the spike, and it is almost too easy. One living herb pot you snip from all season costs about what a single clamshell does, except it never stops, and a heat wave only makes the flavor stronger. The heat you were told would kill your garden is quietly making the most expensive thing in your trolley taste better. But the next number is the crop that gets happier the hotter and drier it gets, and crops for months off a single pot. Number 4 loves the heat more than any other. Number 4 is the crop that treats a heat wave as the best day of its life: peppers and chilies. If there is one thing that genuinely wants the weather everyone else is hiding from, it is this. Peppers and chilies come from hot climates, and the hotter and sunnier it gets, the happier and more productive they are, setting fruit and ripening in a blaze that would stop a cool season crop dead. Here is why the heat wins, and it is the payoff that makes this number. With chilies especially, heat and a bit of drought stress do not just grow the crop, they crank up the flavor and the heat inside the fruit, so a chili grown hard in a heat wave comes out hotter and more intense than a soft, well-watered one ever would. Stand a couple of pepper or chili plants in your hottest, sunniest spot. A pot against a baking wall that throws its stored heat back at them overnight is perfect. Mulch the top and keep them just watered. A single healthy plant can hand you a steady crop of peppers or chilies for months, the exact fresh peppers you pay a small fortune for by the 2 or 3 in a plastic tray. Here is the spike. One pepper plant in the right hot corner can quietly replace a rebought tray of peppers week after week through the whole hot season, and the heat only makes them better. You have turned the hottest, most hostile corner of the yard into the most productive one. But the next number is the tough, leafy backbone that just keeps standing and cropping while a heat wave burns an ordinary bed out by midsummer. Number 3 is the green that does not quit. Number 3 is where a hot garden does something a mild one struggles to. It gives you a leafy backbone that crops right through the heat, chard and perpetual spinach. Here is the whole secret and the reason to grow them on purpose in the heat. Chard perpetual spinach and leaf beet are tough, deep-rooted leaf crops, and unlike ordinary spinach which bolts to bitter seed the moment it gets hot, these hold their nerve. They are far more heat-tolerant and far slower to bolt, so where a bed of normal spinach is finished and gone to seed by the first hot week, the chard just keeps standing and cropping, leaf after leaf, right through the heat wave and often for many months from a single planting. This is the surprise that makes the whole video worth watching. It gives you the fresh, tender spinach-style greens that everyone else has lost to the heat, exactly when they are hardest to grow and most expensive to buy. Plant a few chard and perpetual spinach in a deeper trough or a big pot, mulch it well to hold the moisture, cut the outer leaves as you need them, and leave the heart to keep pushing. Here is the spike. A handful of these plants can hand you cooking greens almost every week right through a hot summer, the exact chard and spinach that cost a fortune fresh and wilt in a day, from the spot everyone else has written off as too fried to grow leaves. The heat that ended everyone else's greens is where yours keep going, but if chard is the backbone that never quits, the crop at number 2 is the one everybody thinks of when they think of summer, the one that actually needs this heat to give you its best. Number 2 is the king of the hot container. Before I count down the last 2, stop and look at what that baking hot corner is already holding. A tray of heat-proof leaves cropping while the street's lettuce has bolted, a living wall of drought-proof cowpeas and yardlong beans up a string, pots of Mediterranean herbs made more flavorful by the very heat, peppers and chilies loving the blaze, and a backbone of chard and perpetual spinach standing through the summer. That is already the freshest and some of the most expensive corners of the cart, all grown in a heat wave that everybody told you would kill a garden. And the last 2 numbers are the heavy hitters, the 2 that actually earn the word never, the summer fruit everyone wants but grows soft and flavorless without real heat. And at number 1, the heavy staple you lug home in a sack that thrives on heat and almost no water and gets lifted right there with no digging. Quick question while we are here, and I do read every reply. How hot does it get where you are in the summer, and what is the one crop you always assumed the heat would kill? Tell me in the comments. I am genuinely curious. Now number 2. Number 2 is the taste of summer itself, the one crop that actually needs this heat to be any good, the tomato, and in a container the small ones are king. If you grow one fruiting thing in a heat wave, make it cherry and small fruited tomatoes. Here is the honest bit that makes this the perfect number 2. The giant beefsteak tomatoes can sulk and drop their flowers in the most extreme heat, but the cherry, plum, and small fruited types are far tougher. They keep setting and ripening fruit through hot weather that stops the big ones, and they were built for a pot. And this is the whole point of growing them in the heat rather than despite it. The blazing sun is exactly what ripens a tomato and concentrates its sugars, which is why a sun-drenched homegrown cherry tomato tastes of something and a cold-stored shop one tastes of nothing. Stand one cherry tomato plant in a big pot in your hottest, sunniest spot, mulch the top thick to hold the water, feed it, and keep it watered at the roots. Here is the spike. One healthy cherry tomato plant in the full heat can hand you handful after handful of sweet, sun-ripened tomatoes for months, the exact punnet you rebuy every trip and eat half of before you get home, and the heat wave is the reason they taste as good as they do. A couple of plants and you have stopped buying tomatoes for the whole summer, from the weather everyone else is hiding their garden from. But the crop at number 1 is the one that flips the whole idea in your head, the heaviest, most boring thing in your trolley, that positively loves the heat and the drought and gets lifted out clean with no digging at all. Here is number 1. Number 1 is the heavy, filling, expensive staple that most people never dream they could grow, and that genuinely thrives on everything a heat wave throws at it, the sweet potato. Here is why it is the perfect number 1. While your ordinary potato wants cool, moist ground, the sweet potato is a tropical crop that revels in long, blazing heat and shrugs off dry spells that would stress almost anything else. It is one of the most heat and drought-tough staples there is. The hotter your summer, the better it grows. Stand a couple of deep grow bags or old compost sacks in your hottest, sunniest spot, fill them with a decent soil mix, mulch the top, and plant a couple of sweet potato slips into each. That is the whole setup. No bed, no digging, no ground to break, and it asks for far less water than you would think. The lush leaves sprawl and cover the pot, shading the soil and holding its own moisture through the heat, and all the while it is swelling a haul of sweet potatoes down in the dark. And here is the payoff I opened the whole video on, the one that flips it in your head. When they are ready, you do not dig. You grab the bag and tip it straight out, and a clean pile of sweet potatoes rolls out with not one of them speared or cut in half, grown in the exact weather everybody swore nothing could survive. Then do the same for other heat-tough roots, beetroot for its leaves and its root, and carrots in the cooler edge, grown in loose stone-free bags where they come up straight and clean. The heaviest, most rebought corner of the whole cart, the filling roots and staples, grown and lifted in the middle of a heat wave, that is number 1, and that is the countdown. Now here is how you run all 7, so it actually replaces the shopping instead of just surviving a hot spell. Here is the part that ties 7 crops into one working garden instead of 7 separate pots, and it is the reason a baking hot garden can genuinely keep you out of the vegetable aisle. The whole thing comes down to one idea: you do not fight the heat, you match the crop to it. Heat and drought hand you 3 gifts a cool, wet garden fights all year to get: far fewer pests and diseases, flavor and yield the sun actually improves, and a long, fast, generous season, and they are brutal on exactly one thing: the cool season leafy crops and your water supply. So the system is 4 simple rules. First, grow the heat lovers, not the cool season crops. Fill the space with peppers, chilies, cherry tomatoes, sweet potato, cowpeas, the heat-proof leaves, and the Mediterranean herbs, the whole side of the shopping that actually wants a blaze. And do not waste the heat wave fighting to keep a lettuce or a normal spinach alive when they were only ever going to bolt. Second, this is the big one in a drought: hold the water in the soil, grow in deep pots and beds, not shallow trays that bake dry in an hour, and mulch the top of everything thickly, a layer of compost, bark, straw, or even gravel, because a mulched pot can lose a fraction of the water an open one does, which is what turns a heat wave from a daily watering battle into an easy garden. Third, water deep and seldom, not little and often. A good long soak at the roots in the cool of the evening, once in a while, sends the roots down deep and drought-proofs the plant, where a daily splash on the surface keeps the roots shallow and thirsty. Fourth, never leave a pot bare. The day you pull a crop or tip a bag of sweet potatoes, refill and replant it the same day, mulch it and keep it working, never a patch of bare soil baking uselessly in the sun. Do those 4 things, and the hot corner is always growing something, which is the only way 7 crops add up to a real dent in the shopping. And one quiet bonus of building it all in pots and bags: you can move a pot into a touch of afternoon shade on the very worst days. Nothing is permanent, and if you ever move, the whole garden comes with you. So that is the countdown: 7 vegetables you can grow in a heat wave and stop buying. Fast heat-proof leaves for your first win while the streets lettuce bolts, a living wall of drought-proof cowpeas and yard-long beans, the Mediterranean herbs the heat makes more flavorful, peppers and chilies that love the blaze, a year-round backbone of chard and perpetual spinach, the container king cherry tomatoes ripened sweet by the sun, and at number 1 the heavy staple, sweet potato and roots you tip out clean with no fork in the ground. This channel is called 1 Acre Blueprint, and by now the real lesson is clear. The blueprint was never really about the acre, and it was never about having the perfect mild, easy season. It is about how hard each square foot works, and a baking, sun-hammered corner, planted with the crops that were built for it instead of the ones that were not, can keep a family out of the vegetable aisle right through the hottest weeks of the year. Do not try to build all 7 at once. Start with 1 this week, a tray of heat-proof leaves for a crop in a few weeks, or a single pepper plant that loves your hottest corner, or a pot of rosemary and thyme that the heat only makes better. Subscribe to stay on the 1 Acre Blueprint, because next we take this exact idea somewhere else the world swears nothing grows, and the crops that quietly prove them wrong. And tell me in the comments, of these 7, which would you grow in your heat first?